Imagine a man who walked out of a 209-year prison sentence by handing a guard a sheet of paper and then spent the next decade running one of the Caribbean's most efficient and violent drug networks. That single image explains why his story reads like a thriller and why it left real damage across neighborhoods, courts, and government agencies. What follows is a grounded, factual account that keeps to what public records and reputable reporting show, to give your audience a clear and compelling look at how that life came together and unspooled. He first entered headlines after a violent episode that ended in a murder conviction and a staggering sentence. While serving a multi-decade term for serious crimes in the 1990s, he used a forged release order to walk away from custody in 1999. That escape was the opening gambit for more than a decade of freedom on the run. Public reporting and contemporaneous accounts described both the simplicity of the escape and the brazenness that followed. Once free, he rebuilt contacts, boats, safe houses, and a logistical chain that linked suppliers in South America and the Dominican Republic to distribution points in the United States and Puerto Rico. Law enforcement investigations later described this organization as one of the central shipping nodes for cocaine moving through the Eastern Caribbean, with operations that involved maritime smuggling, bulk cash movements, and layers of middlemen and corrupt officials. For investigators, the operation was notable not only for volume, but for its coordination across islands and coasts, which made it unusually resilient and lucrative. His public image during those years was a mix of showmanship and menace. He invested in visible luxuries, cultivated attention, and, according to multiple news investigations, became a figure of gossip and fear in equal measure. Underground media and reporting documented an odd assortment of details: lavish homes, cars, public taunts aimed at rivals and authorities, and even the circulation of a sex tape that amplified his notoriety. Those elements did not make him a celebrity in any healthy sense. They made him a target and a symbol of how organized crime can appropriate spectacle to intimidate and recruit. The scale of the offenses that followed was extensive and methodical. Federal indictments assembled after his 2010 capture would list years of conspiracy, dozens of shipments measured in hundreds of kilograms, and the laundering of proceeds across borders. Court documents and prosecutions that flowed from those investigations demonstrate how the enterprise worked like a small industry: suppliers, transport teams, receivers, and cash couriers. Those records also show the pattern of violence that kept participants in line and deterred interference. When courts and prosecutors later described quantities and networks, they relied on seized records, cooperating witnesses, and intercepted communications. The capture itself is worth pausing on because it underlines both the failings and the reach of law enforcement efforts. After a decade as one of the most wanted fugitives in the region, he was arrested in San Juan in July 2010 in an operation led by the United States Drug Enforcement Administration alongside federal and local partners. The arrest followed years of joint investigations and indictments that tied his name to transnational shipments and other crimes. The moment of capture closed one chapter of illusion and opened a long, complicated legal process. What happened in court was not a simple replay of the old prison sentence. He faced a complex stack of federal charges, indictments returned against many associates, and a litigation trail that stretched for years. He eventually pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges, and federal sentencing later reflected the scale of the conspiracy as laid out by prosecutors. The legal filings, trial records, and appellate documents that followed show a web of cooperation agreements, witness testimony, and contested facts about who had which role inside the organization. Those records are a reminder that criminal enterprises depend on human networks and that prosecutions depend on human witnesses. Beyond the courtroom drama, the social and institutional effects were immediate. Streets and ports that had been used for smuggling saw a rebalancing of power as lieutenants and rival groups fought to control routes. Authorities warned of potential violence as leadership vacuums appeared. Communities that had been harmed by the flow of drugs and the violence around control had to navigate a new and dangerous scramble for influence. Prosecutors and law enforcement also used the case to showcase improved interagency coordination, from federal prosecutors to regional patrols at sea. Those changes did not undo the harm, but they did change the operational environment. Even after pleading guilty and serving time, the legal story continued. Sentencing and appeals, cooperation with defendants by various names, and administrative records make the final chapters more ambiguous than a tidy ending. Publicly available court documents and news reports show sentencing decisions, plea bargains, and later procedural developments. Some reports note that he spent years in federal custody following the 2010 arrest, and that his case produced multiple convictions and sentences for associates. The legal record is complex, reflecting the many moving parts of a sprawling conspiracy and the way U.S. courts process transnational organized crime cases. So what is the through line that matters for an audience hearing this story for the first time? First, it is an object lesson in how ordinary systems can be beaten by both simple fraud and broad corruption. A forged paper allowed a convicted killer to leave a cell and resume criminal life. Second, it is a study of logistics. Modern trafficking is less about singular cartel portraits and more about networks that combine maritime know-how, cash smuggling, and local enforcement gaps. Third, it's a reminder of consequence. Arrests and prosecutions disrupted a major operation, but they did not erase the social costs of years of trafficking and the violence that attended it. If you want to present this story to an audience, emphasize 3 human-scale threads rather than a moralistic rise and fall. First, the mechanics, how the escape happened, how shipments and cash moved, and how investigators built a case. Second, the social footprint, the ways in which luxury, corruption, and spectacle intersected with neighborhood harm. Third, the legal aftermath, what prosecutions and court records actually accomplished, and what they did not. These threads keep the story informative and close to verifiable records while remaining interesting and surprising. Finally, be clear about sources and uncertainty. This account is drawn from court documents, federal press releases, and reporting by established outlets. Specific elements such as escape, the scale of trafficking, the 2010 capture, and subsequent prosecutions are documented in those public records. For parts of his later story, public records include filings and press releases that can be dense and sometimes contradictory. When presenting the story, flag those moments where reporting and filings diverge, and invite the audience to value verified court and government sources above rumor.